The following story you are about to read contains scenes of extreme violence, gore, and explicit language, and the content might be disturbing to some viewers. So if you cannot handle this type of content, please stop watching this video now. And viewer discretion is advised. Thank you. What is going on, guys? It's Archangel with a brand new series on the channel where I'm going to be reading different creepypastas on the internet. So I'm actually on Creepypasta's official website. Now, for those who are not that familiar with creepypasta or don't read them as often, Creepypasta is an internet forum that for years people have been making scary stories and everything. But this one, as you can see on your screen, was just published a few days ago, and it's called Officer Down. It was written by Marcelo Crow. And the reading time is estimated to be 6 minutes. So it says... So I'm going to be reading different stories, and we're basically going to see how good these stories are. The date is November 1st, 2018. This is... I'm sorry about the cough. This is Detective Ray Sherman. Excuse me. Badge number 13557 of the Internal Affairs Investigation Unit number 334. We are investigating the night of October 31st, 2018, case AF6H765, where Officer Pete Mendoza was found alone with 5 surrounding officers dead in an apartment following a routine domestic disturbance investigation. The only remaining body cam is that of Officer Mendoza, which turned off as things escalated at the house. Officer Mendoza was found unarmed and stripped of his clothing, while the officers found dead showed signs of cannibalism, including scratch and bite marks. In one instance, as pointed out by one of the coroners, there were signs of possible rape. The 5 officers in question were Aaron Brown, 31, decapitation; Neville Larson, 42, decapitation; Linda Miles, 27, stabbed with signs of cannibalism; Michael Mickey Marone, 60, self-inflicted gunshot; and finally Mary Lynn's, 24. In Mary's unusual case, her intestines were pulled out through her mouth and she was stabbed through the clavicle and held pinned to a door. No signs of jaw dislocation or anything that would indicate human foul play. Officer Mendoza is suffering from PTSD and anxiety and will be transported to the nearest psychiatric ward unit at Our Lady Memorial Hospital after we interview him. Report 1, Sergeant Harold Dixon. First report, 7:03 p.m. Officer Ray Sherman, badge number 13557. State your name, he says to the other person in the room. I am Sergeant Harold Dixon, badge number 07088. Sergeant Dixon, please run me through a timeline of events from when you first saw Officer Mendoza to when he was dispatched to investigate the domestic disturbance. Of course, it was just another day. I had my coffee, said my usual hellos to everybody, and got bitched at by my superior, as always. I saw Officer Mendoza that day and nothing seemed off. He seemed completely normal and was actually telling me about how excited he was because his little girl was starting softball after his shift. Did Officer Mendoza do anything out of the ordinary? Not to my knowledge, but his partner Dory might know more of that. All I did was say my usual hello to Pete and did my other work, and that was all I saw of him until they found him later. What about the other officers murdered? Anything unusual from any of them? You know, come to think of it, Mary. She was always very superstitious and always told us when she was a girl that she'd had her palm red and the fortune teller told her that she was going to die on Halloween. She must have believed it because she always requested off that day each year. But we needed her to work this time as we were short-handed. Poor girl. She came in this world screaming and probably left the same way. Report 2, Officer Dory Vega. Please state your name and role. Dory Vega, partner of Pete Mendoza. Was anything unusual to you about Pete today? Or Pete that day? Nothing really. I usually go with him on every call, but I had a lot of paperwork to do. And he told me to stay behind as Halloween is usually a bunch of empty reports and kids prank calling. What kind of paperwork? Usually arrests and forms were required to do. Has Pete said anything? He has yet to. Since they found him 15 hours ago, he has yet to say a word. Has anyone told his family? Yes, his wife and daughter have been informed of the situation. Why do you ask? I worried about Pete sometimes. On extremely rough days, he always had a Bible and rosary beads, and would mumble any prayers or verses that would come to him. He always said, "The devil has tested me today, Dory, but I'm going to win." Do you know if Officer Mendoza had any vices? only drinking, but he overcame it, hence the Bible. He always had it on him. Said if he went to hell, at least there'd be reading material. Report 3. Dispatch Officer Cedric Hansen. Please state your name and role. Cedric Hansen, Dispatch Officer. Thank you. Anything unusual ever stick out about Pete? I've known Pete since college, and he was always a party animal, but settled down when he got a DUI. Went to AA and met his wife. From there till now, nothing. He was just very religious when he came back sober. Now, the night you got the call, was there anything unusual on the other hand? And not really. It was from a neighbor who called in and said she heard screaming next door. It didn't help that we always get phone calls about that address. But again, with Halloween in full swing, everyone was on edge. We get tons of prank calls on that day every year. It never fails. We tried calling the house, as we know them quite well, and got no answer. Just an irritating tone, like the old dial-up internet modems. As someone who has worked and known Pete the longest, do you believe he would ever harm a colleague? Never. Pete's a great guy. He never touched a gun until he got to the force. I know you have all your paperwork, evidence, and interviews that make it seem like Pete must have killed his fellow officers since he was the only survivor, but I tell you this, Pete Mendoza is innocent. Whatever happened last night in that house makes you think that this is bigger than anything you could grasp. Why do you say that? Pete texted me before I came into this room. Impossible. He hasn't had access to a phone since he was found. Exactly. And you know what he texted me? Help. Can't. Scream. Run. Report 4. Detective Ray Sherman. Detective Ray Sherman here, reviewing all of the body cam footage we have. Only Officer Mendoza content was recovered. From what I can see, there's nothing unusual in the drive over. Officer Mendoza is pulling up to the address where the domestic disturbance was reported. As he pulls up, the other officers are already on location. Officer Mendoza is getting out of his car and walking into the house. As he walks up the driveway, there is screaming and loud heavy metal music audible. We see Halloween party decorations all over the front yard. The door is left open and Officer Mendoza walks in and sees 4 officers kneeling in an X formation over what appears to be a pentagram. In the middle of this is a suspect in a red robe. He appears to be around 6 feet tall and is wearing some sort of horns, possibly a ram's. At the point that the audio goes erratic and begins resembling Morse code, followed by screaming and then silence. Officer Mendoza appears to tell the suspect to drop any weapon he has and get on the ground. The man looks at him and with a smile, and Officer Mendoza appears to tell the other officers to stand up. None of them are listening and the door shuts behind him. As he turns around, Officer Mary is pinned to the wall by hooks inserted near her clavicle. Officer Mendoza proceeds to point his gun at the suspect, and the suspect raises his right hand with his left one placed on one of the officer's shoulders. He begins to raise it, and the officer's head proceeds to roll off his shoulders. The lights flicker, and the man in the robe seems to vanish. From here, the body cam video goes dark, and the audio continues for another 30 seconds, when nothing but static noise and the sound of both men and women screaming nonstop. Report 5, Officer Pete Mendoza. Officer Mendoza, we're going to ask you a few questions now. Please answer them as best as you can. I can see your hand shaking. Would you like a smoke? No answer. Okay then, now please just walk us back to the moment you walked into the house. Do you hear the screaming? I'm sorry? Do you hear the screaming? It started out as laughter, and now it's like somebody getting their soul tortured. Do you hear the screaming? Officer Mendoza, this is no time for games. You have serious crimes against you, and they're all screaming. They're dying. They're all dying. Please, turn it off. Please, please, turn it off. Turn it off. Turn it off. Turn it off. Mendoza, there is no screaming. It's all in your head. It's all in your head, Mendoza. My head? It's all in my head. 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 All a mushy cracked skull sound is heard. What the fuck is... The audio abruptly cuts out. Report 6. Officer Kate Pitts. This is Officer Kate Pitts reporting badge number 36369, commenting on the night of November 1st, on which footage shows Detective Sherman interviewing Officer Pete Mendoza. As they sit down, Officer Mendoza is shaken and clearly unstable for questioning, but here's where the whole story gets odd. After Detective Sherman tells Officer Mendoza that everything is in his head, a sharp spike of some sort erupts from Officer Mendoza's head, like someone cutting from the inside out, and punctures its skull. It unfurls into what I can only describe as a spider's legs, and cracks Officer Mendoza in half vertically. Detective Sherman is sitting across from me, and we are trying to piece together all of the events, but he has yet to say anything. Both of his hands are shaking and his pupils are dilated. Detective Sherman has requested a pocket Bible, which has been provided. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Now please recount to us as best as you can what happened after Officer Mendoza's head opened up. The footage just goes black. Do you hear the voices? Do you hear the screaming? Do you hear the voices? What voice, Detective Herman? Turn them off! 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 What voice is Detective Sherman? It's too late. Okay, that story was actually really intense, but I did not expect it to end that way. So if you guys enjoyed this episode of Ark Reads Creepypastas, Officer Down. So that was the story, Officer Down. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.